You are watching Life on Gabriola TV, community television, for you, by you.
Hey, Frank Moore here with Life on Gabriola TV, bringing you a recent meeting of the, and I'm going to take a deep breath here, Gabriola Recreation and Electoral Area B Parks and Trails Master Plan Advisory Committee. As RDN Director Vanessa said at the meeting, it's a very long name. But the committee does important work for us, and this meeting may give Gabriola, Mudge, and DeCourcy Island residents a glimpse into what's in store for our recreation areas and natural spaces in future. In it, Recreation Planner Stephen Slawuta presents the results of an engagement process meant to gather input from residents regarding recreation services on Gabriola and park services throughout Electoral Area B. But perhaps the most notable part of the meeting are the remarks of Snuneymuxw First Nation representative Desiree Thomas. Here's a preview of that.
Hi, thank you. I guess my point is sort of around how would we see Snuneymuxw being, included in this master plan. I do note that while we're not residents of the island in large numbers, we are landowners on Gabriola Island. We also have both Gabriola and Mudge are both unceded village areas for Snuneymuxw, and I note that historically colonization has typically taken areas of great importance to Indigenous people and created parks on them. And so I note the lack of sort of the protection around archaeological sites on Gabriola specifically, and how we want to go about that. And so I raised the issue not to be argumentative, but to say that Snuneymuxw is sitting here at the table, I think, to be working partners so that we can be collaborative to ensure that the cultural resources of the nation are protected and not further degraded by people who wish to enjoy the beauty of Gabriola and Mudge and DeCourcy and such. So I'm really mindful that people want to use the parks, but there are some really sensitive areas that we've identified internally that I'm sure you guys are aware of too. So just curious as to how we see Snuneymuxw being included moving forward, and note that because we don't live there, we would not have done surveys. And this has been an ongoing gripe of mine with the regional district, that they seem to forget that we are actually under them, and then they have to do a little bit more in terms of outreach so that we are included in some of these surveys. But thank you.
There's more. If you're pressed for time, you might want to use the timestamp we've included with the text accompanying this video to hear all of what she had to say. In any event, here's most of the meeting.
So why don't we move into your report then on 6.1.
You bet. I'm just going to share my screen here and just get everybody to, if you can just give me a thumbs up there if you can see it on the screen.
We can see it. Okay,
great. Right. So in terms of the presentation here, and it's not so much of a report, it's more of a kind of a summary presentation of a report, the What We Heard report, and that is, or soon will be, available publicly if it hasn't been circulated already. But we just want to give everybody a bit of an update on the project here, go over some of the engagement findings, and then we do have a quick couple questions that we're interested in getting your thoughts on at the end, and then obviously we can further some of this discussion, or if there's any additional clarifications or discussions, more than happy to do that as we go along as well. So project timeframe. So we initiated the project in April and June, and spent a good chunk of the summer there doing engagement, as well as a host of other research tasks that I'll touch on here. And now kind of where are we? Well, we're in this phase 3, summarizing the various research and engagement and starting to kind of shift towards the strategic visioning and direction setting for the master plan, which will certainly re-engage this group with likely early in the new year. Get a draft master plan developed in early 2024, and then look to have that reviewed with the community in the spring. So all that to say, we're on schedule generally in terms of the overall project. Some of the background report timelines have had to shift around a little bit, but the master plan is scheduled to be complete when we originally had slated it for completion. Engagement. So our team's been undertaking quite a significant amount of engagement here through various surveys that I know some of you have been involved with or helped us get the word out on, and big thanks for that. We've had some sounding boards up around the islands, and we had 21 discussion sessions, including with Gabriola Rec Society, Galt, Pozak, Islands Trust, and a number of others that are in the room, and just obviously community organizations as well. And then we hosted an open house and had about 30 attendees. And as I mentioned, we have a What We Heard summary report that I believe was distributed to this group, and certainly it'll be available on the project page on the website as well. Sorry, was there a question in the room there? If I heard someone jump in.
Just saying that we did receive a copy of the report. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there's a number, as we just talked about, number of other research pieces as well that will be compiled into a fairly thorough research report, which will just kind of go through a couple of those items, previous and related planning. So there's a whole bunch of that we'll summarize and have in that document. Our GIS team's been working on a fairly thorough spatial analysis, so looking at where some of those particularly kind of park and trails gaps are within the study area, particularly on Gabriola. Trends and leading practices review, so looking at broadly what are some of those key activity and infrastructure and service delivery trends and best practices out there regionally, provincially, nationally, and so on. Population demographics and growth. So there'll be some thorough analysis around that. And we like to also relate that to the spatial elements where we can within the study area. And then I think Derek might have mentioned service level review as well. So we'll be looking to include things like benchmarking, as well as other elements of service delivery, what the mix is, and relate that back to trends and so on. So all that work's ongoing and will be compiled into a report that you'll all see here fairly soon. So with that, I'm going to jump into a few of the findings from the resident survey. The more detailed findings for sure are in that What We Heard report, but we just pulled out a few that we thought were of particular interest. So just a bit of an overview first of the survey. So you can see the graph on the left of the screen. Obviously, and somewhat in alignment with demographics of the islands, kind of a higher level of middle-aged and over adult respondents. And again, this is by respondent, so it's not household breakdown. This is actually who answered the survey. Just out of RDN policy, we couldn't ask about personal attributes or characteristics as we sometimes like to. So this isn't representing exactly who's in the household, it's just who responded to the survey. Most of the respondents, over 80%, were full-time residents of the islands.
Steve?
Yeah.
If I could jump in there, I'm just trying to follow, because you're not following the document that we were provided with, so I'm trying to keep pace here with what you got. In terms of that point about, do you consider your household a full-time residence on Gabriola, Mudge, DeCourcy? In the text on page 5, consider yourself, it says a second home property, a second property.
I caught that too.
And it says 89% say that they consider it to be a second property. So it should be revised or reversed.
Okay. Thanks for grabbing that. Well, I'll take a look at that. I'm kind of toggling on the screen here, so I don't have, but I'll take a look at that. So thanks for catching that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about that too, because it seems to be the opposite of what it should be.
So,
okay.
So I've got one more. I've got a question as well. It's Rob here. So the survey responses, do you consider the number and the demographic split fairly representative of, are the results fairly representative, I guess is my question.
Of the community
Of the
composition?
community composition, yeah, so it's, I don't know what the numbers of responses were, versus the population and the age breakdown. Do you consider it a representative sample, I guess?
Yeah, I would say yes in terms of the overall study area. Like if you start to break it down into the subsegments, obviously the response numbers get smaller. Like if we're only looking for, what would be an example of that? Like people that participate in recreation only, like how do they think? Like maybe like the reliability gets less as you break it down into the subsegments. But like the 250 plus responses we got from the coded version of the survey, I would say gives us a good level of statistical reliability. So and there is a plus or minus margin of error in there, which is off the top of my head, I think it's about 5 or 6%, which is pretty reasonable. Anything in and around that we would say is pretty reasonable in terms of how it lines with household age demographics. Again, as I mentioned, just unfortunately, we weren't able to ask the question about like composition of your household out of privacy concerns. So you can't really comment on that. But the overall representation, the number, we were quite happy with.
Steve?
Can I go with Susan first?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Chair Craig. So Steve, I have a question about household composition and the return that you got for this initial survey. I'd be very concerned about getting 0% on the single parent caregiver family. I would really want to find a way to get some responses from that component of this community.
Yeah, like I mean, the thing about the surveys is like we send out a postcard and like we kind of get what we get. Like there's only really two ways to do a statistically representative survey. One is through like and they both need a control mechanism. One is through some sort of mail out with a code, which is what we did. And the other, which would be a phone survey. And that's becoming harder and harder to do as less people have landlines and people have different area codes associated with their cell phones. So, we tried to do the best we could with the survey, and we have to sort of take the results as one input into the process.
You have a follow-up?
Yes, I do, very briefly, because I did distribute some of those postcards to places I thought they might be used. But the one place I did not take them to was the People for Healthy Community. And I did leave some at the school, but perhaps some could have gone out with the school newsletter or with the parent advisory committee.
Yeah, I'll just say that, we've done the survey bit, and I think, we keep that in mind that we're missing that demographic, but I mean, everybody who has a mailbox got one of these in their mailbox. So it's yeah, we're a bit limited in everything that we can do. I've got Kyle and then Rob.
So since you've got this slide up, Steve, right now, in terms of respondent age category, I made a note here that on page 30, it talks about satisfaction with programming, and it teases out 3 categories under the age 20, a 0 to 5 category, a 5 to 12, and a 13 to 17 years. How do we do that when we don't have it shown in terms of respondent age category? I'm missing something here.
Yeah, we're asking people what they think the programming gaps or strengths are.
So that could have been a parent in the 40 to 50 range answering on behalf of their children that they found that programming satisfactory or not satisfactory?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
And Steve, I noticed you decided to not lump the coded and non-coded responses together in the analysis. What's the, I mean, I think I probably know, but what's the reason for that?
Yeah, because we don't have a control, great question. We don't have a control on the non-coded respondents. So someone theoretically, like with a special interest group or a person just in general, if they like doing surveys, they could have answered 5, 10, 15 of the non-coded respondents, whereas the code, it was limited for response. So that's why we keep that pool separately.
Okay, thanks. Just to follow up to your question, Rob, because I found for the most part, they were very, very similar in terms of the coded and the non-coded in terms of the percentages, except the one area that was a significant difference was in terms of willingness to pay. I think was the one that I came across later on. And yeah, there was a big jump there. But anyway, it's a side comment.
Yeah. So I know we're a little crunched for time with the chair there too. So I'm gonna keep moving on here, but certainly welcome the questions as we go through. I mean, the front part of the survey was really about us just getting more of a sense or validating why people do the activities they do and what they do. So asked a number of questions like, what are the main reasons that you participate in rec activities, parks and open space activities? I think the key thing here really always is that this, I think, validates that a lot of recreation activity occurs spontaneously or casually, and that's not to and for a variety of different reasons. So a lot of, some things that are kind of interpersonal, things that are just going out and enjoying nature, your own health and exercise, as well as a bunch of social things as well. So, 64% said pleasure and entertainment, 53% said to be with friends and family for recreation. So a bunch of things motivate activity. And I think that's always important for us to remember that it is kind of a blend of things. And then again, it kind of validates that a lot of that activity does occur kind of spontaneously. So obviously things like trail-based activities, your at-home leisure, even just going to community events, those are things that you kind of do on your own volition. They're not necessarily scheduled, which isn't to, again, take away any of the importance of things that are scheduled. It just shows that a lot of stuff does occur kind of in more of an unstructured manner. So this is the finding from the Gabriola Island respondents. We asked about household members' willingness to travel. What do they actually kind of travel to participate in on a regular basis? And kind of interesting. So about half said social activities. So they're leaving Gabriola Island for social activities. 43% said they're leaving the island for trail-based type activities, 33% nature-oriented activities. And then we go kind of further down the list where we start to see some of the more kind of organized types of activities that are resulting in people having to leave the island for participating in those things.
I just want to note here that people leaving the island isn't necessarily because they have to. I mean, everybody likes a variety of things, and so in some cases, certainly a pool you have to, but so mountain bike riding and stuff like that. I know people do it here, but they also go to Nanaimo just in the surrounding area. So.
Yeah, 100%. This isn't meant to position any of that in a negative context. It's just more of a point of interest. And you're right. People are leaving things because maybe they live on the island because they're passionate about trail-based activities and they like doing those things there, and therefore they travel to other places to, get different variety or whatnot as well. Of course, we want to get a sense of what some of those prevalent barriers might be to participating in opportunities. And I'd have to say that the nothing bars on here, which are the top for really both recreation as well as parks and open spaces, quite a bit lower or higher rather. Like there's more nothing prevents my participation than in a lot of other jurisdictions in which we've worked across Canada. So I mean, like, I'm sure we could all speculate on why that may or may not be, but we certainly found that to be quite interesting. When we look at barriers to participating in recreation opportunities for Gabriola Island residents, 18%, so a fairly small proportion said, hey, the features or amenities aren't offered, as well as kind of just personal type reasons. So that would be things like maybe they work, their schedule with work, or things like that could be present some barriers. And then there aren't really a lot of big bars in terms of visiting parks and open spaces. So I would kind of see this as a fairly good news story. in terms of there not being a whole amount of prevalent barriers. We typically see these bars a lot higher in other places. We asked about satisfaction. So this graph is for community park services and for Gabriola Island respondents. So, again, if we kind of look at the satisfied bars, which are the light blue and the green there, pretty high levels of satisfaction for most different aspects of community services. The dissatisfied bars, which are the orange and the darker blue, are all pretty low. The ones that maybe are a little bit higher than others. So if we add up the dissatisfied bars for water access, that's 21%. And then similarly, it's 21% for land conservation and stewardship. So yeah, for whatever that's worth, those would be the two with the highest levels of dissatisfaction. But we look at trails, community parks and amenities, parks and trails programming and educational opportunities, all really quite low. This next graph is the same question, but for respondents from Mudge and DeCourcy Islands. The notable thing here is the level of dissatisfaction with water access, and just based on what we've heard from some of the findings, just kind of anecdotally through the different discussion sessions. Not say we're overly surprised because that kind of validates some of the other comments we heard, but 36% had some level of dissatisfaction with water access. We look at the recreation facilities, indoor and outdoor. Outdoor facilities, so 60% said satisfied to some degree. Obviously, in the future, be awesome if we could push that green bar more into the light blue bar and have more light blue there and have more kind of very satisfied. But majority of respondents indicated a level of satisfaction. 16% were dissatisfied with outdoor facilities and spaces. And then a lot more kind of neutral responses for the indoor facilities and spaces. So 32% were satisfied to some degree, 43% unsure, and then 25% or so were dissatisfied. Looking at Mudge and DeCourcy Islands, we then for respondents there, we asked, okay, like what are the recreation and park amenities that you think should be more readily available or enhanced? I think this relates well to the water access level of dissatisfaction. 45% said boat launches. Fairly high percent of respondents said just open space in general. About a third said natural surface trails, and then it kind of phases off a bit from there. Looking at when we asked the same question to Gabriola Island respondents around recreation and parks amenities that should be more readily available or enhanced. Boat launches still were number one, but not quite as high as Mudge and DeCourcy respondents. So 32% said boat launches. Interestingly, about a third or so, just slightly under a third, indicated off-leash dog parks. So not sure if that surprised us or not, but kind of notable that the dog off-leash areas or parks were something that a decent amount of respondents thought should be a priority for investment, and then about a quarter natural surface trails, and then kind of so on. We look kind of down at the bottom, probably not unexpected, paved pathways and trails. Only 15% identified those, but still, a healthy proportion of respondents.
Steve?
Yeah.
Question with regard to the boat access and boat launches.
You bet.
And results coming back on the survey. I found it very interesting because I hadn't really given it that much thought previously in terms of how strongly that came across from public responses. But one of the things that I don't think the survey drills down to is what is it that the people are interested in for the boat launch water access? Is it primarily recreation or is it primarily transportation? And here on Gabriola, and even more so when it comes to Mudge and DeCourcy, my sense is that there's a mix, and and more importantly, in those locations, those other islands that, you know, for transportation purposes, it's a key reason that they're looking for those boat launches and that water access. And then for Gabriolans, it's more so for recreation purposes, I would think. But I don't think we don't drill down to figure that out. And when it comes to transportation, then is it sort of outside the scope of this study and this master plan, and more so well, not responsibility, but more of interest to Ministry of Transportation or others.
Yeah, so good point. Like in terms of the survey, we did run some sub-segment analysis on the types of boating activities that people are doing, and that was something we talked quite a bit about through a lot of the stakeholder discussion sessions with people that were particularly interested in water access. So I'd say we drilled down on it a fair amount through a lot of those discussions. The workshop as well that we had, that was one of the discussion tables we had where we talked about specific sites and kind of gauged things like, do you want like bigger launch sites or smaller launch sites, and kind of all of that. What are you using it for? What types of watercrafts? But one of the challenges with the survey is we have to keep, like, we don't have an hour and a half of people's time in the survey too. So we have to kind of pick and choose kind of the lines of questioning a little bit. So we tried to do the best we could, but we really did explore it through the discussion sessions, which I'll get to in a few slides here.
Yeah, yeah.
I would also say that MOTI will not do anything for boat transportation. Like, they don't consider that a transportation issue, so.
Yeah, like as far as the scope of the master plan, I mean, our directive is certainly to provide some guidance on the types of launch points that are needed and some next steps. Like, obviously there's a lot of different stakeholders at the table around water access, and it's a complex issue, and there's probably some technical analysis needed as well. But we're going to try to provide as much direction as we can. So moving on here, this slide here shows respondents from Gabriola Island. We asked them specifically about indoor recreation facilities and amenities, and those that should be more readily available or enhanced. And obviously the runaway winner here is a aquatics facility, and then fitness and wellness facilities, performing arts theaters, gym space, art creation spaces, quite a bit lower. So respondents were certainly keen to tell us about or to select pool as one of the things they would like to see more of. Getting into programming a little bit as well. So we asked, okay, like what types of specific elements of programming do you think need improvement or changes? And the highest bar there, so about a third of respondents said, nope, no improvements or changes needed. We like what's going on there. About a quarter said greater variety, and then it kind of drops off a bit from there. If we go down all the way to the very bottom, so only 3% said better instruction. So sounds like the instructors that you've got running programs there are quite a high level of satisfaction with instructors. More convenient locations and cost and quality and all those things were selected by only just a handful of respondents. So really, for those that did identify changes, it was more around variety and scheduling and things like that. We asked, okay, like how informed do you feel about parks and recreation? Again, in kind of an ideal world, we'd love, if we did the survey again in 5 years or 3 years, we'd love to swap or to push some of these adequately informed over to the left to be very informed and have those bars kind of consume some of that space there. But overall, pretty low levels of people feeling inadequately informed. So only 16% amongst Gabriola respondents. A little bit higher, quite a bit higher amongst Mudge and DeCourcy respondents. So about a quarter said they feel inadequately informed. So that might suggest that beyond some of the obvious barriers to access that those residents face, that maybe there's a bit more work that can be done around informing them of how and when and where they can access parks and rec opportunities. So for those that have had a chance to review the What We Heard report, you'll see quite a bit of sub-segment analysis in there where we've kind of pulled out different points of interest from different cohorts that responded to the survey, and just wanted to touch on a few that we thought were notable or interesting, and probably a little bit intuitive as well, but maybe sometimes validating what you think you know is valuable as well. So first point there. So residents that were less tenured, so those that have lived in the study area for a less amount of time, they were far more likely to identify aquatics, paved trails, and water access as needs and priorities. So, you know, if I was kind of extrapolating or trying to guess at why that might be, I think it would be because maybe they had some of those services in the communities that they came from, and feel that those are maybe not as available as they're used to, but found that was kind of interesting. Respondents that had lived in Area B for less than a year were more likely to indicate that they have participated in indoor physical activity than those that have lived in Electoral Area B for 6 to 10 years. Kind of interesting there. And Gabriola Island respondents, we looked at some of the self-reported, like how do you use or how do you access water and for what purpose. Gabriola Island respondents were more likely to use access points for non-motorized watercraft, so kayaks, stand-up paddleboards, canoes, whereas Mudge and DeCourcy respondents indicated that they use those access points more for motorized types of boats, and particularly smaller, you know, aluminum type of crafts. So probably not a huge surprise there, but that was just something we kind of wanted to point out from the analysis. So I'll move into the discussion sessions unless there's any questions on any of that.
No, Susan's got a hand up, I think.
I do have a question. Thank you, Director Craig, and thanks, Steve. So on page 36, there's a bar graph on the willingness to pay to support increase in property taxes. And throughout this entire document, the green bar graph has been used for Gabriola. And on this one, the blue bar graph is used. And I'm wondering if that's an error.
I'll look at that and get back to you. You bet. Well, if it is, we'll correct that.
It is because the numbers don't make sense either. Did you have something?
Derek did first.
Oh, Derek.
I just got lots of questions about some of the different data and how they relate to each other. And I'm just wondering, and maybe this is an already in staff question, if we see something in here and we want to ask questions about some of the deeper data that might not be in this report, can we talk about that? Like the example I have here is like we have satisfaction of programming by age. And then we have another section here that was improvements or changes needed, and it lists all of the different reasons for that, but it doesn't tell me, you know, seniors are mostly satisfied except that they want a more convenient schedule, like the interrelationship between those two sets of data. So I'm not going to ask you to explain that now, but if the GRS board or staff or somebody wanted to delve into that just to give us some better data to work with, who can we access that data and who would we ask?
You know, I think if you could just send an email to Hannah with those questions, and we'll see if we can run some of that crosstab analysis. I'd have to obviously see exactly what you're looking for to have our team look and see if it's possible just with the data, but we'll do our very best to get whatever insights you're looking for.
Thanks. Just things like that could save us quite a bit in having to do our own survey for those kinds of questions if you've already got the data there. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Love to be able to obviously get the best insights to you as possible. There's kind of an endless amount of crosstab analysis you can do with a survey like this. So we couldn't do it all, but we can certainly get you what you need. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, there was something else, Steve. You pointed out that, and I can't find the charts right here now, but yeah, it was interesting in terms of the number of Gabriolans that put pools and aquatics at the highest level in terms of wanting to have access to it. But I found it was equally interesting, and I can't find it exactly now, that the responses, if I'm correct from my memory, from Mudge and DeCourcy, theirs was even higher for for aquatics and pools. So I don't think we should be, necessarily interpreting all this to say that there's a high expectation that that particular facility will be constructed, here on this island or Mudge or DeCourcy for that matter. But it's just an important point that people are making, that they would like to make sure that they have access to that. So, as I said, I don't have the exact chart right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we didn't ask Mudge and DeCourcy residents about, we didn't give them that indoor list of priorities.
Yeah.
Steve, I know when we did the survey, it was just willingness to pay. It didn't give a range. And I know I've seen other surveys, would you be willing to pay $100 extra per year on your property taxes? Would you be willing to pay $200 extra on your property taxes? Is that something that would come in as we're moving forward, if we start looking more seriously about like a high cost item, whether or not it's a recreation facility or a pool or something like that? Do you spend more time kind of drilling down into that level of willingness to pay? Because willingness to pay, that could be interpreted as $10 extra a year. Like I think things are a lot more expensive to build and maintain than people realize sometimes.
Yeah, that would be something that would be if you were exploring a specific project that you would go to referendum on. Typically that would be something that you would look to do a work around that with the correct parameters. It's just hard at a master plan level to really put a lot of parameter around what we're asking. It's more just trying to gauge people's general willingness, rather than create kind of quantifiable expectations about something that isn't really a project. We're just gauging general willingness to pay.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll move on, and certainly happy to loop back on any of this later on. So we had a number of discussion sessions, 21 of those with a number of different groups and interests, including a number of you and your colleagues and friends in the room there. So just wanted to pull out a few key things, key themes that were kind of prevalent throughout a number of the discussions. And again, probably a lot of this isn't a huge surprise, and sometimes that's a finding. A lot of the times that's a finding in of itself. So the first kind of bucket of things here are in terms of kind of parks, trails, and water access. Again, probably not a shocker here, but a lot of the discussion or a lot of the feedback to us was around trails, both as recreation amenities and for active transportation, and particularly, people that maybe don't have cars, or they don't want to use cars, or kind of the equity conversation around trails and just maneuvering around the island, and how it's important not to lose sight of that, in addition to all the kind of recreational purposes of trails as well. Number of comments around just both opportunity and need to improve trail signage. And a lot of that discussion was particularly around 707 and just some of the work that's been done there, and the opportunity to do even a little bit more in that space to provide guidance around trail activities and good use of the trails, where trails go, kind of all of that. Third point there, a lot of feedback around making the best use of available land and ensuring kind of optimal land acquisition to meet parks and trails needs, and the balance that's involved in that, which relates to the next point, which is that a lot of discussion or a lot of concern and feedback about ensuring that development maintains ecological integrity and conserves outdoor space. So sort of the notion that not every space needs to be developed into something, that it's important just to have space that's not developed or not developable, that's kind of preserved and kept to again kind of maintain ecological integrity. As the second point from the bottom there, I'd say, is something that came up in a lot of our discussions, particularly with some of the more formal groups there, and that's around just the importance and the need to develop some updated park management plans, that provides some very kind of specific and tactical timing around actions for every park. So kind of making sure they all integrate with the master plan, but having this series of park management plans that outline kind of a future concept, if you will, for that park, what purposes it should be used for, the objectives, the amenities to support that, kind of all of that. And then lastly, mentioned in the survey, heard it a lot of discussion on it through the sessions around water access. And it was interesting that discussion included increasing overall supply of water access points, but a lot of it was also around just the amenity and some of the issues around those water access points. And I would say, like on Gabriola, most of the discussion was around issues around the water access point. So it was, there's safety issues, not enough parking, some dangerous parking, kind of all of that, the role of Modi and others, and public-private discussions, and all that was kind of really prevalent on Gabriola, whereas on Mudge and DeCourcy, it was just more about overall supply of water access points and different thoughts on how to best address that moving forward. Shifting into recreation facilities and programming, I would say kind of the overall theme there was just general satisfaction with programming, very similar to the survey. So heard plenty of positive comments about GRS and its specific instructors and programs and all that, and how GRS is doing a great job and that model works really well, and not just kind of pumping the those GRS folks at the tables tires there, but with a lot of discussion was really complimentary of GRS. So that was good to hear. Did hear about a number of needs. So certainly the that kind of large span gymnasium, field house, flexi hall kind of space came up a lot, both in terms of meeting needs for organized programs, emerging groups like pickleball, unstructured activities just being available for drop-in hoops and badminton and all those kind of things as well. Third point there, a number of folks we talked to indicated that, hey, it's people that have lived here for a while generally kind of know who's who in the zoo and what's up, but it's important to make sure a lot of efforts go into linking new residents with activities, because sometimes they can get a little bit lost and it's maybe a different context or type of community than from what they've moved from. And we want to make sure that we get them involved in activities. And then other things we heard, challenges with sport fields, a number of different perspectives on that, certainly. Transportation is a barrier, particularly for residents that live, kind of away from kind of the settlement areas on Gabriola, and how do they get to programs and activities. Residents on Mudge and DeCourcy, obviously, if you don't have a boat or you can't always get access to a boat, that's obviously presents some challenges as well. Aquatics, so obviously came up quite high in the survey. Definitely a lot of recognized desire for an aquatics facility, but I would say in the discussions we had, there was also kind of a general realization by most as to the cost of building and operating a pool, and that maybe it's not viable in the 2023 context of how much everything costs these days. So kind of some differing points of view there. And then heard a bit about opportunities just to enhance communications and collaborations, and that's everybody system-wide. That's the RDN could do better at this, and this group could do better at that. And, so there was just kind of a general thought that need to make sure that the system is a little bit more cohesive. Just a few other kind of points of interest or themes that came up, kind of bubbled up a fair bit through the discussion. Importance of coordinated planning. So, heard quite a bit about Modi and water access and, Department of Fisheries and all the different players at the table with the different types of amenities. The second point was kind of interesting, and I would say some contrasting viewpoints around whether tourism and visitation in general should have any sort of, or be any sort of driver of what does or doesn't get invested in. There's some that think, an amenity like 707 could be kind of a premier regional, mountain biking destination, and as an example, and then others are like, no, we really think it's important that is first and foremost an amenity for residents on the island, and we don't want a bunch of people, on our trails and all that kind of thing. So different perspectives on that. Third point there, just, I'd say, a general theme that we don't need to just think like everybody else. We need to be creative and come up with local solutions and think outside the box wherever possible. And then lastly, just a recognition that needs and trends and what people want to do and how we need to react to them are always kind of evolving. And heard a lot about something like pickleball that maybe wasn't in really anybody's consciousness, a decade plus ago, and now it certainly is. Youth activities are evolving. Things like prevalence of different types of wheeled sports, skateboarding and scootering and mountain biking and all that kind of thing are important to accommodate those activities and realize that we're not ever just static around these things. So that's in a nutshell, what we took away from, or some of the things we took away from a number of hours of discussion. And I'll just kind of finish off with a few of the other different pieces of engagement, and then we'll pause for questions. So sounding boards, had a number of sounding boards up throughout around Gabriola, and we also had an open house that I know saw a number of you at, which was great. And on the sounding boards, diversity or broad array of social and recreation issues were shared on those sounding boards. But some of the kind of key takeaways from the sounding boards and the open house, we heard quite a bit about pickleball, and pickleball came out quite strongly as attendees. Aquatics, various perspectives on that. Some of what we already just talked about through this discussion sessions were shared at the open house. Heard quite a bit again about multi-use indoor space and the need for kind of that flexible, large span gymnasium type of space, sport field needs, conservation, preservation, and climate change. Number of comments on the sounding boards, as well as comments at the open house. Trail and trail amenities, and then water access safety. So again, starting to see some fairly consistent themes kind of line up or emerge here. And these were some that were reiterated to us at the open house and on the sounding boards. And then lastly, we had a workshop that I know a number of you were at as well on October 23rd. We had about 25 folks at that workshop representing kind of a number of organizations and groups, pretty much all that we had talked to through the discussion sessions or through this committee. We presented a very similar slide deck than what you saw today. And we had 3 breakout tables around water access, recreation activity needs, and parks and trails opportunities. So just to quickly wrap up on a few of the themes we took away from those workshops. In terms of water access, the folks that were kind of in and around that table really expressed a desire for multiple new launch points. And kind of the rationale there was spreading out boat traffic and creating increased levels of safety. So, kind of more smaller launches was kind of the theme there. Again, the need to be creative and open to partnerships around water access. So a number of folks kind of pondered, different private marinas out there that, is there an opportunity here and there? Could we acquire this land that we don't already own? Things like that were kind of brought up. And then also looking at parking and staging areas, and particularly on Gabriola, around some of those busy sites where there are issues, what could be done there. Around recreation, a lot of conversation there, and I know a number of you were part of those discussions. Importance of leveraging current capacity and expertise of GRS was a common theme there. Heard the perspective that the survey findings may not reflect on the ground participation needs and capacity challenges. And, that's again where we'd reiterate that the survey findings are just one input. And then opportunities to get inactive people more active. That was kind of the overall question we had thrown out to the group there. And there was some really good discussion around that. And then lastly, around just parks and trails here, I'd say kind of the common theme at that table is that the survey findings really did validate for a lot of people what they thought some of those activity trends and needs were around parks and trail spaces. There was quite a bit of discussion around that table around 707 Community Park and some of the future of that and how to best optimize it. Conservation and environmental considerations around all different types of spaces, whether it would be, cemeteries or manicured or non-manicured spaces, trails and community parks and neighborhood parks and so on. And then lastly, trail accessibility and potential improvements, just to create more kind of equitable access to the water and park amenities. So, different, even things as simple as having accessible staircases to get people that maybe aren't quite as fit or have some mobility challenges down to the water, get them kind of engaged in the trail system a little bit more. So in a nutshell, that's a summary of what we've learned from the engagement so far, and have the rest of our time here just for any discussion. So there's a few questions that we posed there to you, kind of the second and third ones there. Interested certainly in what surprised you or what didn't surprise you, but happy to also take any questions or further anything else that we've talked about earlier on today.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'm gonna have to leave in about half an hour, a little bit, so hopefully we can have a focused conversation. I was wondering if we could just start, could you remind us again of what the next steps of this are and the dates for these next steps that we have going forward?
Yes, certainly. So we have a meeting, I think it's tentatively, or maybe it's not tentatively anymore. Maybe it's kind of written in everyone's calendar, for Monday, February 5th. And that's our next get together, where really we'd be looking to test some key recommendations and priorities and get you to tell us what you think we've hit the mark on, what we've missed the mark on. And then also just maybe a bit more tactically review a draft master plan framework, like a table of contents, and get your feedback on if you think that's an appropriate layout, or if that's going to be something that's kind of a digestible way to present the information. And then discuss how we want to go back to the community, and if there's any particular kind of engagement information gaps that we need to gauge the community's feedback on while we present the draft master plan to them. So that's our next meeting after Christmas.
And just going back to Kyle's question at the beginning there, so is there going to be engagement with the GRS prior to that meeting on the report that you're going to, when is that report? You talked about the background report. When is that coming out?
Yeah, we're going to have that before Christmas. So certainly, I mean, I can work with Elaine and Hannah to figure out how to roll that out, and yeah, 100% happy to sit down and page flip through that with GRS and talk about maybe what if there's anything missing, or explain kind of the analysis we did. Definitely open to doing that.
Okay, good. That was my initial questions. Derek?
Just playing off that, when you say the report, are you talking the recreation services review and the park services review?
Yeah, the background
2B,
report.
2C?
Yeah, that Steve was talking about.
Okay.
Working on.
Because my question was for those. If there's, and maybe this is already in staff that answers, if there's some living engagement to be done with that because of some current issues that are coming up that GRS is dealing with, is that part of what we can forward to you as part of these reviews? If there's, what I don't want to see happen is we get this thing, we get together in February and we find out that over the last 6 months, something else has been going on in the background that wasn't included in these reviews. Is that something that you would be talking to our staff about? If there's anything like that? And I'm not saying any specific issues, I'm just.
Oh, no. Not sure.
As I look over at Aaron. Mostly is RD and staff engaging with GRS staff just to make sure that we're as up to date on those things as part of that report?
I'm not clear on what your question is.
Sorry, Derek. I'm not sure what your question is.
So, okay, I'll use the sports fields as an example. If we're finding that this year's way of, I don't even know how to better ask this question. Our staff may have things that they're aware of right now that may be useful to have included as part of that recreation services or park services review. If they have that information, is that stuff that they can be sharing with you as you write those reviews with the consultant ahead of it getting released? Is that captured?
No, that at this point, if we don't know about it, it's not captured.
Okay, but is the opportunity there for them to provide that to you or to this or to Steve?
Steve, it would be. I'm not writing the report, so it would have to be provided to Steve.
I guess that's what my question is.
Sorry, I'm not really sure I understand either.
Yeah. So if there are ongoing issues on the recreation front, the GRS would like to share with us, can they share that with you directly prior to the release of this document coming before Christmas? Or would that be better suited for the draft master plan, which is coming after Christmas? Well, the draft isn't coming in, the framework is coming.
Yeah, I think the sooner the better. Like, I mean, those are things that we, because the research report is a bit of a current state snapshot. So if there's anything that's kind of new or emerging, like it'd be good to get that as soon as possible, and we'll make sure we see if that where that fits in the research report.
Thanks, that's the wording I was looking for, thanks.
So that,
ongoing.
so that didn't come up during the engagement session that GRS had with the consultants during those times.
No,
Okay. All right, so we'll work on getting a time that we can have that meeting prior
thanks.
to Christmas, which is 4 weeks away.
It's coming up quickly. Rob?
So Steve, I noticed in the report, it says you've received 6 written responses from organizations. Gabriola Land and Trails Trust is not marked as one of those 6, but we did submit a written response. So hopefully you have that. That was my first, I guess, wanted to say. And secondly, what surprised me about the report, I guess my biggest surprise was accessibility, barriers to accessibility to trails and water wasn't listed as a big issue. I think 6 or 7% of the respondents said access was a barrier. That's very different than an accessibility survey Galt did in 2019, where those issues were flagged in the community as very important. People with mobility issues for trails and water access, but somehow it didn't seem to come out in the report. So that sort of surprised me.
Yeah, so two things there. So the written response, I've seen it, I've read it, I know that for sure. So if it's not mentioned in there, we'll make sure we correct that as well. In terms of the access, I would say, like, and I mentioned it in one of the themes from the discussion sessions, like we heard, like that came out quite strongly through that engagement tactic. I don't know why it didn't come out stronger in the survey. Yeah, I mean, hard to say. Maybe it's not something that was kind of or is impacting the majority of respondents, but I mean, it's something that, again, we heard quite a bit through the discussion sessions, and just as a best practice, our trails lead will adjust and will ensure that's a strong element of the report, because it just is as a best practice.
Rob, can I ask you a question about the Galt survey? It was specifically aimed at identifying accessibility and mobility issues, right?
Yeah.
That was the whole point of the survey?
Yes.
So the people that didn't consider it an issue probably wouldn't have participated in the survey?
Anyone had a chance to participate, so yeah.
Yeah. It'd be a self-selecting group, and I mean, the inverse may be true for this one, for all we know. So
That's a great point, and probably the likely reason why it didn't come out quite as high in this versus the Galt survey previously. Yeah, great point.
Right.
By the way, I see there's a hand up online from Desiree, so we could. Probably
Yes,
hard for you all to see. Yeah.
actually, maybe Steve, can you stop sharing, because I can't see? Yep. Oh, there she is. I can see you now. Go ahead, Desiree.
Hi, thank you. I guess my point is sort of around how would we see Snuneymuxw being, I guess, included in this master plan. I do note that while we're not residents of the island in large numbers, we are landowners on Gabriola Island. We also have both Gabriola and Mudge are both unceded village areas for Snuneymuxw. And I note that historically, colonization has typically taken areas of great importance to Indigenous people and created parks on them. And so I note the lack of sort of the protection around archaeological sites on Gabriola specifically, and how we want to go about that. And so I raised the issue not to be argumentative, but to say that Snuneymuxw is sitting here at the table, I think, to be working partners so that we can be collaborative to ensure that the cultural resources of the nation are protected and not further degraded by people who wish to enjoy the beauty of Gabriola and Mudge and DeCourcy and such. So I'm really mindful that people want to use the parks, but there are some really sensitive areas that we've identified internally that I'm sure you guys are aware of too. So just curious as to how we see Snuneymuxw being included moving forward, and note that because we don't live there, we would not have done surveys. And this has been an ongoing gripe of mine with the regional district, that they seem to forget that we are actually under them, and then they have to do a little bit more in terms of outreach so that we are included in some of these surveys. But thank you.
Thanks, Desiree, for that. I don't know if the staff have any comments on how we include this, or whether or not you would see important cultural areas being identified through this process. I don't know, anybody have any thoughts?
Maybe as part of the spatial analysis, you can do a layer showing the ARC sites and cultural sensitive areas so that we identify that internally.
Yeah, I mean, it would obviously need, it's sensitive information. So
yeah.
Well, for example, I'll throw this out there, one of the biggest issues around boat access or water access and more, that in and of itself would flag to be one of the highest risk levels for our nation. The foreshore is home to clam gardens and resource areas. So for us, I think it would just be interesting to see, because we will be residents of the island. So one of those things that it may not be a factor now, but it will be a factor in the future, is the presence of Snuneymuxw members on Gabriola. And so what are going to be the wants and needs that our members have when they do become residents of the island, and water access is an interesting one, because I think we would have different perspectives of what that means and the impact of it. Considering that on Gabriola specifically, there is already a major ferry that has incredible environmental impacts simply from it running. And then we want to talk about adding additional private moorages to an already very populated area with great environmental concerns there. Yeah, I think that, so those are the types of things. So you're already identifying issues that we would as a nation flag as being high risk. And so, yeah, just wanting to have a path forward so that we are inclusive in that conversation and ensuring that there is an appropriate cultural perspective being included in the master plan.
And Desiree, Kyle
Sorry.
here, made a comment earlier about, that we may already be aware of some of these sensitive areas, and I don't know that that's actually the case. And I'm just wondering about the sensitivity from your perspective of some of those sites. And I presume, maybe incorrectly, that you would not have or want to put forward a comprehensive mapping of where those sensitive sites were.
Well, actually, a good place to start would be what is actually documented by the provincial government, which comes under the ARC branch. So that is a provincial registry that Islands Trust staff does have access to. I know that from working staff to staff on some referral files for Gabriola Island. So they do have access to, at a minimum, a base archaeological mapping to show at least where the ARC sites are, I think. And then anything that's not mapped, that's really where a good relationship with the nation comes in, where we have free-flowing communication so that we can share that information. We're not secretive, considering the amount of petroglyphs and cultural resources on Gabriola that have been disturbed already to date on record. I think it's fair to say that us not saying anything is only to the detriment of our cultural resources. so yeah, I think that there's a level where you have the information available either to yourselves as board members or your staff. So it's not looking to us to provide that information. It's actually doing your own due diligence because you have it. And then working with us to say, are there additional areas that are not mapped? And potentially that is one of the things we're working on with the city of Nanaimo is a archaeological overview assessment that would include not only known archaeological sites, but areas of that we would deem as high importance, so that when they are going forth with developments, they are aware of what that mapping is. So again, it just comes, I think, with a renewed relationship between Gabriola Island, Mudge, DeCourcy, and Snuneymuxw. I don't see this to be argumentative, but I think it's fair to say that it's not been the greatest of relationships in the past. And so as the nation, I'm sitting here on behalf of Chief Wise to really be inclusive and to be a part of this master plan going forward and to provide us a Snuneymuxw perspective.
And we thank you for that, Desiree. And yeah, I think our concern may be that we do have access to the provincial database, but I don't know if it's necessarily complete. But Elaine, I saw you had your hand up to add
Well, I
something.
just wanted to let Desiree know that we are very aware of a lot of these issues, and where the mapping that we do have, we do use that as a tool for every project that we go forward with. And I suggest that thankfully, because of those resources, we have actually considered that and not gone forward with projects in the past. So it has been part of our discussion and our deliberation, exactly, and not put forward projects in the past. So that's a good news story in my view, is that yes, we can always improve our communication. I'm looking forward to that. But luckily, those resources are there, and they are actually working. So from our perspective, we've actually not gone forward with projects, and we've altered projects based on our discussions too.
And Hannah?
So Desiree, have you had a chance to connect with Steve through an online discussion or anything like that? Is that something that you'd be open to doing? Or is there other than yourself that we should be connecting Steve with? How can we facilitate that conversation?
I guess it just depends on sort of what kind of information he's seeking to get and how he's wanting to get that information. Definitely, I'm here as a representative. I'm not the gatekeeper of all the information of Snuneymuxw, but I think if he wants to connect with me offline, we could come up with a way in which we can be engaged. But I'm just curious, seeing that there is going to be a sort of a report coming in the new year, and the presentation just was devoid of anything. There was actually no mention of Snuneymuxw First Nation in the presentation, so I was a little concerned that we were forgotten about again, in what is for us a very important context. Again, I have to push the point that parks and trails are often in areas that Indigenous people used quite importantly for resource gathering and other interactions with the land, right? And so the lack of Snuneymuxw members living on Gabriola really doesn't have anything to do with how we value the territory over there. So I just have to preface that. If that's what we're going by is purely delivering it door to door, then we have missed a crucial step, very crucial step.
Sorry, just to interrupt, Desiree, I sent you an email a week or two ago just looking to connect. So I have a bunch of similar questions that you do. So I'm hoping we can find a time to connect on some of what you've talked about, because I think it is important.
Yeah, for sure. I can dig back through my emails. Obviously, if you just sent it a week ago, I'm still responding to emails a week ago. So yeah, I can dig that out and we can have a conversation. But yeah, I think it is really important too that we give the nation, a respectable amount of time to be engaged. we typically have far less resources than our counterparts at the regional district, the city of Nanaimo, the province, and the federal government. We do our best to ensure that we are included on tables where the topics are of great importance to us. But yeah, we really do want to stress that giving us a good amount of time to respond and be included is also an important part of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Derek?
Desiree, just to expand out from what this particular project was, we've had I shouldn't say we, the Parks and Open Spaces Committee for Gabriola, Mudge, and DeCourcy a few years ago did open up, after being requested from an elder, a seat for Snuneymuxw to take part in the.
Derek?
No? Okay, I'm being told by the chair no. I would invite, I can't make an invitation because I'm not the RDN chair, but the Parks and Open Spaces Committee certainly wanted to have a discussion around Snuneymuxw being involved in those discussions that happen.
That is true. Okay, so, and I thank you, Desiree, for sharing that, because I think it's very important that we hear that, and I think all of us take this responsibility very seriously, and we'll be looking for more engagement and to hear the perspective of Snuneymuxw. So thank you for coming today and bringing that to us. Kyle?
Yeah, I'll be brief. Steve, I can appreciate in the interest of brevity, you were consolidating some of the information from some of the tables in your presentation today so that we can go through the whole thing as opposed to going through the document page by page. Some of us here have gone through it, the document, and had some specific comments. You know, some of them are small things, some of them are errors, some editorials, and some of them are comments. I have, handwritten these out on a piece of paper that's not very legible. How best to, as a follow-up, to get that information to you? Is it going to be through Elaine, maybe,
Or Hannah? I mean, I've noticed a couple of typos in it. The bigger ones have been flagged, but I actually am impressed with the report, Steve, and I find it attractive, which I think in a report like this is important. And I'm also interested to hear if GRS has some added crosstabs that they'd like to dive into it, because I think for some of this, for the smaller groups, it won't be, it'll probably be only a handful of people that responded, but for certainly looking at the groups that responded to the survey in greater numbers, like the older age groups, I think it would actually might provide some useful information to GRS about what specific age groups in general are looking for. But so we could just provide an email to Hannah or Elaine, and you could forward them to Steve. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Or if you want to hand in, if you've actually written on it, if you don't mind giving me the document, we can just scan
I
it.
didn't have the document to write on, so I just got that now.
Yeah.
And so I had to.
But you've got handwritten notes.
Handwrite.
Yeah.
What is your handwriting like?
Yeah, and apologies for any grammar or little like wrong color of the graph. We were just based on some of the feedback from the workshop, we were just kind of scrambling to pull something together that could be kind of made available, just because there was some requests for the findings, and we just thought that was a better format than just PDFing the PowerPoint. So we'll get that tuned up and and make sure that's 100% correct.
Is this a color blindness friendly color palette? I think of it more often just because we have somebody who works at the RDN who's colorblind, and he mentions things occasionally, and is green and blue? Can they tell green and blue apart? I don't know.
I think
It's an RDN branding friendly package. Yeah.
I'll ask him.
Just feedback on your presentation, Steve.
some of the graphics you used weren't compatible with the format and the colors of, we were trying to follow along here on the actual document, and some of the ordering and the format of the colors were such that I found it difficult to find out where you were in the document, but just feedback for next time if you're to do this again.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the feedback. We weren't intending to kind of have them line up with it. Like the document was done after that slide deck was put together. So, but yeah, appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
But I also appreciate you not going through this page by page, otherwise we'd be here for hours. Any other questions? Sounds like any comments or questions can be followed up with Hannah and Elaine, and they'll make their way through to Steve. There's going to be some connection with GRS prior to Christmas to discuss some issues. And then also connection with Snuneymuxw ASAP. Any other questions, concerns, or surprises, I guess? Anybody surprised by anything in the report? Because if you are, then that's something that's quite interesting. Might want to dive down, especially GRS. You've already done a lot of, you get feedback constantly. Were you surprised by anything that was in there?
I would say the stuff we heard about programming in the report pretty much aligns with what we've already had discussions around. Some of the limitations on our programming is around what facilities are available. We can't even ask the question of, that's why I was asking about the data in terms of the age spectrum. Like, do people 65 and older want more programming during the day on Gabriola Island? But if we ask that question and we have no facility that we have access to in terms of the gymnasium during the day, then where do we throw those programs for those people? So having this data in front of us, it's great. Yeah.
Rob?
I was pleasantly surprised to see how important conservation was to residents and the priority for property acquisition. I'm not sure I was necessarily that surprised, but it was very heartening to see that.
I thought it was good to see that affirmed because, I have heard a couple of comments that we have enough parkland, and so you're never sure how widespread that thought is, but it sounded like there's still quite a bit of interest in having more open, undeveloped recreation space, as well as recreation facilities as well. So it was good to see that it's still balanced. I don't think that it was over one way or the other. Derek?
Along those lines, I can't remember the exact point in here where it discussed people's perception of what we have, and communicating to people who are new to the island in terms of what is parks, what is not, what happens to be land that isn't designated as park, but people use it as such. Those kinds of things. I'd be interested to know how many people actually know on the island what is the park and what is undeveloped land that isn't a park, and just the perceptions on that and how they use it as such, and how that affects what they think needs to be protected on the island as conservation.
Well, I get lots of questions about the provincial parks quite regularly. Like,
right.
People don't realize that they're provincial parks. So it's usually they really like them, but they have complaints about the facilities. So.
And I noted the one line about more parking at Elder Cedar. It's like, do we want more parking at a place that is supposed to be primarily for conservation? But, yeah.
Well, and the other thing, I've recently received requests for like a toilet at Orlebar Point. And as soon as you start putting toilets in places, it can open up things. Although, get a big balance. If people are toileting in the area anyway, then there's at some point, there's a, same with the Malaspina discussion that we had. But,
And the backyard discussion.
Yeah, and that, you know, that's a good reminder from Desiree about that area as well. Just for your information, Desiree, the Brickyard Beach area on Gabriola, which is, I believe, an old a village site, is one of the areas that's come up with some people are interested because there's currently picnic tables there that I think the province or their contractors put in decades ago. I think they've been there for a long time. So that area has come up for discussion recently. Did you have anything, Erin?
I think this survey results was useful for me in getting like a broader perspective of our island, because I'm so stuck into my cohort that sometimes I forget how high of a senior population we have. So to see something like 88% of respondents have never used the Rollo sports fields. I was just like, oh, like that's sometimes my whole week is like thinking about the sports fields. So yeah, it's just, I'm not really surprised, but it's good to have these results to gain that wider perspective in a lot of areas. That's just one example. So
yes, I was surprised too with some of the parks and the lack of people saying they never, what, you never even go there? But
yeah, exactly.
Any other comments to wrap up before I need to pack up and go? Sorry, just family duties. I don't see any other hands. Rick, Wayne, Hannah?
I guess I'm looking forward to the next steps, and you know, the devil's always in the detail, and trying to understand, you know, when you talk sports fields, you're talking soccer or softball, because there are different infrastructures involved, and the same around the water access, trying to better understand what that would be for. So getting a little bit deeper on the priorities that have been raised and understanding where and what. And making sure that we're sensitive to the cultural areas. So that's going to be a big part of the whole process.
Yeah, no, and thanks for bringing us back to that, because I will say one of the biggest pressures I hear is the water access issue, but we have not moved forward with projects because it would require developing in an area that we know is sensitive. So we just haven't done that. It's hard to sometimes explain that to people, but it has to be an expectation and knowledge of the community going forward. I think that this is an important component of how we live on the island. Yeah. So, Tim, last.
I am looking forward to taking this package home and reading it in depth, because I didn't get it in time to really look over all the numbers. So I'll take this home and really chew it over. And yeah, I would echo that I'm happy that Snuneymuxw was represented in this meeting today, and happy to have that voice spoken.
Great. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Motion to adjourn.